Being a soldier in combat means you're trusting your buddies to your left and right with your life. But what happens when those people in your army are convicts, sometimes dangerous ones? Well, unfortunately, that's the reality for a lot of Russian soldiers. And leaked calls from some of those soldiers reveal what they really think about serving in an army that welcomes violent, dangerous convicts. Let's get into it. Okay. This is, of course, coming to us from Insight from Ukraine and Russia. And I've got the link down below, as always. You guys know his channel. Almost certainly getting these leaks from the Ukrainian intelligence services. So it's kind of a treat that we get to watch them at all. Let's get into it.
Consequences of this strategy.
У нас один, не с нашего взвода. Короче, командир своему ноги порезал.
Что порезал?
Ноги. Вот не знаем сейчас, что.
In military operations, keeping your plans, codes, and locations secret from the enemy is of paramount importance. But even if you're not planning a military operation, you should still take your information security seriously. Hackers want your passwords, tech companies want to harvest your data, and scammers want you to click their ads. That's why I wanted to talk about today's sponsor, Private Internet Access. PIA is a VPN, which is a digital tunnel that hides your internet data from nefarious actors who might be trying to observe it. You log into the VPN from your location and then browse the internet from the other end of a secured tunnel, and it's nearly impossible for a hacker or scammer to trace you back to your original location. When you connect to PIA's VPN, you can select your country, which not only makes your connection secure, but allows you to bypass geo restrictions on content, so you can watch shows only available on Netflix in certain countries. PIA is compatible with all streaming platforms and even peer-to-peer file sharing. To connect, open the PIA client, select your country, and connect the VPN, and you are ready to stream geo-locked content or browse the internet securely. Best of all, PIA works with an unlimited number of devices, so one subscription covers every device you and your family might own. Click the link in the description or go to PIAVPN/combatveteran to get 83% off private internet access with 4 months free.
So I don't understand what he means by he cut the legs of his own commander. He may be describing some kind of assault. Trying to... So it may be describing what was known in the Vietnam War as fragging. If there was a commander who wasn't seen as especially competent, or was so incompetent usually that they were actually a danger to their troops, for example, they just had no tactical bearing or refused to listen to enlisted soldiers who might have served longer and knew how to conduct operations more safely. In extreme cases, those officers would have unfortunate accidents in combat that resulted in their becoming KIA. And it's not clear how often this happened, but the Vietnam War sort of did it to themselves, because officers would serve as little as 6 months in command roles of a unit. That would mean that a company commander would only do 6 months before being rotated out with a brand new company commander. Bear in mind, drafted soldiers would spend 12 months in Vietnam before returning home. So they had an exceptionally good commander in their first rotation, they may find him replaced by someone with very little experience, very little capacity, and oftentimes the officers would be detailed from other branches. So they might be intelligence officers who never wanted to have a role as an infantry commander, but found it forced onto them. So all of that contributed to the fragging, again, possibly epidemic. So this may be what he's describing here, but again, in all likelihood, it's a ex-con or current convict. So it could be simply some sort of predisposition towards violence.
Будет. Они от нас уже, километр, 800 километров от нас они стоят. Пропустили специально наши, а у нас еще поставили только рядом с ними.
So he's describing, he's using very non-specific language. So usually when he says they're standing 1,800 meters away from us, that's the approximate distance between Ukrainian and Russian soldiers on the front lines, depending on exactly where we're talking about. He says, our idiots purposely let them through. Damn. And they put us right next to them. So I think they're saying our idiots, he's probably referring to these convict troops, purposely let them through. Probably they don't want to engage Ukrainian forces. They're lazy, they're uncommitted, they're not really there to fight. So they simply allow Ukrainian troops to pass, meaning that for soldiers in the rear or soldiers in other positions, the Ukrainians are going to get every advantage. And he's saying they put us, meaning probably active duty regular Russian military, right next to these convict units.
Я говорю, уже сколько человек с воду уходит.
Заяц, я еще хотела тебя спросить. Смотри, а если, например, человек сидит, он подписывает контракт, со словом...
Вроде сейчас уже не сберут, раньше брали. Кто на зоне был, когда сидели, штурм за это отправляли.
Right. Storm Z is a PMC that we've seen sort of emerge after Wagner. And the Storm Z units or Storm troops are generally the assault troops used to push or conduct frontal assaults on Ukrainian positions, usually after Russian artillery has softened up the positions. Those Storm Z troops will then be instructed to advance. Usually they do so pretty simply, like running and shooting, but not much more complicated offensive tactics than that. The hope is that by blasting Ukrainian positions with artillery and thermobaric rockets, that it won't actually require that robust of a frontal assault in order to take the positions. And it seemed to work when it was Wagner troops, because Wagner seemed to have a brutal but effective training program for their assault troops. Wagner also had a very skilled professional corps. And frankly, at the time, Ukrainian forces were not as well equipped as they are now. So our Ukrainian counter-battery fire was less likely to take out Russian artillery, meaning that those artillery bombardments were actually much worse for Ukrainians.
Набора нет больше. Уже все отказывают, потому что есть у нас вот тюремщики, которые есть здесь. Они капитаны зарезали и ног себе переломали.
Right. And he's describing, of course, prisoners attempting to frag a commander. It sounds more like the way he's talking about what they did to their captain, their company commander. It sounds more like they were being given orders that they just didn't like. That's the problem with this sort of street justice mentality, is that everyone feels like they're entitled to it, but when you're coming from a prison, you may simply not understand how militaries work, right? You may not, for example, no soldier likes being put on a work detail or a very long guard shift, but a trained soldier understands that even though a guard shift may be unpleasant or annoying or tedious, that it's essential to keeping the larger operations safe, right? But a prisoner may not understand this. He may simply believe he's being forced to stay awake in a guard tower out of punishment, out of cruelty, out of dislike. And so, that they may simply feel like, oh, this captain is punishing us by making us sit in a tower for 12 hours in isolation. And it's like, no, it's not a punishment. It's necessary to keep everyone safe.
И сказали, больше не будут присылать. Зэки, которые есть, они что делают? Они переводятся, они переходят сразу к архам и на их сторону стоят. Раньше, да, вот куда я хотел перевести эти Вагнера, а сейчас Вагнеров вроде пока нет.
I'm not so sure.
Right. He says they immediately join the Ukrainians and stand on their side. I don't think that's true, but I would not be shocked if the prisoners surrendered at the first opportunity. Again, bear in mind, guys, soldiers, right, ultimately join the military on some level out of a sense of loyalty to their country. But if that country has thrown you in prison, then you're not going to exhibit the same level of loyalty. Remember, how are you going to take orders from a government that ordered you incarcerated for decades? Even if you did all the things they said you did, you're still going to have a core emotional resentment. And so for those convicts, when push comes to shove, when it comes time to really dig in and fight, they're unlikely to do so. And they're more likely to surrender or defect to the Ukrainian side. Probably the Ukrainians probably aren't going to let them fight for them, right? If they weren't good Russian soldiers, they're not going to be good Ukrainian soldiers. But I'm sure the Ukrainians are happy to have prisoners that they're able to then exchange for their own troops.
Sure that Russia ceased to recruit convicts from prisons, but it definitely changed its strategy. Now convicts don't get promised freedom after 6 months of service in Ukraine. They sign up military contracts that requires them to participate in this war till its end. Russia did this because, as it turns out, the criminal activity increases when you let thousands of criminals be on the loose. For example, this guy that you see on the screen right now mass murdered 6 people in his village, and he did this after he returned from war in Ukraine. Also, this guy on whose back it says "Only God is my judge" has returned from war in Ukraine as a hero, even though previously he was convicted of murder of this peaceful old couple. Those people are dangerous, and I doubt that war makes better persons out of them. Anyway, now let's...
He's spot on, actually. Okay, it's sort of. It's more complicated. There are some people, and I'm sure we all know them, who thrive when given a certain level of structure, right? Some people don't need much structure in their lives to be happy. Right? They're able to be productive, happy citizens with like the regular amount of structure, which is you go to a job, you come back from the job, you pay your rent, you pay your bills, you watch some TV, you watch some Netflix, you go on a date, you talk to your kids, you go to bed, right? That's the level of structure that the average person has in their lives in America. There's some people who, when given less structure or that level of structure, they simply make terrible decisions by their own admission. They get off of work and they go drink at a bar from 5 until midnight, and then they're blasted drunk. They wake up, they're hungover, or they're still drunk. They go to work, right? They make these awful decisions, and or they use drugs, or they, take your pick, gamble away large sums of money, right? Where you give them that level of freedom, and they just ruin their own lives. Again, this isn't like my opinion, but a lot of them would even agree. They're like, listen, if I have 8 hours after work, I'm going to self-destruct with it. That subset of people, some of them get into the military or even get deployed. A lot of them get deployed where they sit there and go, listen, you can't leave this fob. After patrols, you can do anything you want, but that anything is the computer bank, you can play some video games, you can work out. That's it. That's what you got, right? You can go online, video games, working out, read a book. And with that set of choices, they make great ones. They really get their lives together. They attend college classes. They get in great shape. A lot of people go, this is the structure. This is the level of structure that I need. I'm just a person who needs 10% more structure or 50, more like 30% more structure to my life. And those people can at times go from engaging in criminal activity to being very, very well-respected soldiers. We knew several of them that we came back and immediately fell back into drug use, into, alcohol issues, DUIs. They had it before the deployment. They deployed, they came back, they had it again. And, that's one of the secrets, right? The difference is after the deployment, they actually blamed the deployment for their DUIs or their drug use. And it was like, guy, we knew you were in the Army before you went to combat. You still had a meth problem. You still had a drinking problem. And so I say that because, the problem is that if you're naturally a violent sociopathic person, right, violence is also, it's not just a predisposition, but the actual execution of violence is a skill, and you can normalize it. Just like the first time you got behind the wheel of a car, you were terrified, and now you can do it casually, like half asleep. right? Violence is no different. And so if you normalize shooting people, if you normalize throwing grenades, if you normalize beating the hell out of somebody, then it's going to be easier for you. There's not going to be as much resistance to doing it. And that is something you don't want to take someone who's already kind of dispositionally violent and then turn them into someone who has who's normalized the execution, the nitty gritty of committing violence.
Let's listen to the second intercepted phone call.
Что вообще как с этим, с оснащением, там, с жрачкой,
это нормально.
там, с
Да
формой?
мы тут не паримся вообще в этом плане. С этим, ну, такое оборудование там, знаешь. У них все круче, чем у нас, короче.
Ну, понятно, что у них хуя надо. А наши все продали, просрали.
Ooh, he's alluding to a common problem. Sounds like it's still going on, which is selling Russian stuff. Yeah, Russian military is famous even before the war for absolutely high-ranking generals feel they're entitled to more pay, more compensation, and their system, unlike in the US, where if you're a former flag grade officer, you can usually land a pretty nice gig at a defense contractor if you're above a certain rank or have certain specialty roles like acquisitions. So the idea is that you draw a pension and then you get to work another job. Some of them get preference for government positions, so you'll draw a full-time pension plus have a pretty cushy government job. The result is you're making $200,000 a year, after your service. But if you don't have that system in place, right, in Russia, it seems like those generals self-compensate by selling a certain percentage of their allocated supplies or supplies signed over to them or trusted to them to line their pockets and get the money they think they deserve.
А наши только по телевизору все.
Это да, все понимают, нормальные понимают. Есть такие, которые не верят.
Короче, у них 20 птичек в воздухе, а у нас одна.
Well, this is a sign. This is interesting, an interesting perspective that I haven't heard. 20 to 1. I mean, he might be exaggerating, but even if it's like 10 to 1, Ukrainians having 10 drones for every one that the Russians can field, that's still a tremendous difference.
Вся разница.
And we've seen increasing use of Russian troops relying on netting, drone netting, right? Let's see if we can find it. Drone netting, Ukraine. We got some images. Yeah, you can see, actually, look at all these. Here's a net that protects against drones. Here's another net protecting against drones. You can see there's a lot of it. Even here is nets strung up along a highway meant to catch low-flying drones that approach from behind vehicles. So a really interesting tactical change on the ground.
Пример.
Ну, мы остались еще на том уровне, как вот от Советского Союза, что осталось.
Совершенно верно, да.
And
Okay, I want to point out that he says, oh, yeah, we fight with what's left from the Soviet era. It's true. You definitely see their tanks haven't been redesigned. There are some T-90s, which are tanks that were designed after the fall of the Soviet Union. But no, I'm sorry. If they were designed in the 90s, they were still Soviet tanks. You have basically no new equipment, right? That Russia designed its Ratnik gear. Almost none of that has made it to the front line. And instead, you've seen a lot of hodgepodge gear, plate carriers ordered from China, that sort of thing. So a true equipment crisis sounds like it's still underway in Russia. Russia very much outgunned, but, again, on the defensive, Russia doesn't need high-end gear. It just needs, as they said, warm bodies that just kind of sort of want to fight. So anyway, that's all I had, guys. Thank you all so much for joining me. Be sure to check out Insight's channel. I link it in the description. I only look at like 5% of the total videos he releases. He has so much access to crazy information. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.